I am not on the contract until I am. The first time I saw my name inside a contract, I thought it was a typo. The second time, I realized it was a cage. The conference room sat on the 62nd floor, wrapped in glass and ambition. Below us, the city looked unreal. Miniature veins of light, orderly streams of motion, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Up here, the air smelled like money and engineered confidence, polished metal, citrus cleaners, tailored fabric, and the faint, expensive bite of alpha pheromones that never quite left these rooms. This was my natural habitat. "Good morning," I said smoothly, the words landing like they always did, warm, practiced, harmless. "Thank you for trusting us with something that's been misunderstood." A few low chuckles rippled around the table. Alphas, investors, board members, family, lawyers with faces like closed doors. Behind me, the first slide glowed to life. Revitalize, not repair. IT's, storytelling. I paced once. Slow, unthreatening. A beta in his element was a dangerous thing. Non-confrontational, pleasant, designed to lower defenses. I'd spent my career turning sinking subsidiaries into inspirational case studies, corporate scandals into brave new chapters, and financial rot into sleek, minimalistic rebrands. I didn't sell products. I sold narratives. People don't connect to numbers, I continued. They connect to meaning, to motion, to the feeling that something broken can still become aspirational. Charts bloomed across the screen. Logos dissolved and reassembled. Headlines transformed from accusations into journeys. Around the table, attention sharpened. I could feel it. The subtle shift in posture, the way bodies leaned forward before minds admitted interest. This was the moment I loved. The instant before resistance gave way. "We're not here to erase the past," I said lightly. "We're here to contextualize it." More murmurs. A few approving nods. I smiled. Then the room changed. Not audibly, not dramatically. Just enough that the back of my neck prickled. The door had opened. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. The pressure told me everything. Alpha. Controlled. Dense. Not loud the way some were. No flooding presence. No dominance display. This one felt compressed, like a storm disciplined into a blade. When I did glance over, he was already standing near the wall, hands loosely folded, suit dark enough to eat light. He didn't interrupt, didn't search for a seat. He simply occupied space. Victor Cross, consortium representative, creditor's envoy, the kind of man whose signature closed companies and whose silence ruined them. Our eyes met. The room didn't react. They didn't need to. He wasn't here for them. He was here for the deal. Something warm and irritated slid under my ribs. A bodily reaction I hated on principle. The faint, instinctive response of a beta nervous system recognizing hierarchy before intellect could intervene. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds longer than polite. Then I turned back to my slides. "As you can see," I went on, "by repositioning the subsidiary not as a liability, but as a legacy structure, we shift public perception from failure to foundation." I spoke faster now, sharper. My words still smooth but edged. The presentation ended the way it always did. Polite applause, restrained approval, quiet power moving behind faces. Questions followed. I answered them. Victor didn't ask any. He watched. When it was over, assistants moved in with folders. Legal teams distributed documents. The soft rustle of paper replaced conversation. I accepted a contract without looking. Habit. Muscle memory. The first page. The second. My eyes snagged on a familiar sequence of letters. Jeremy Hale. I frowned, almost amused. Maybe a misprint. Maybe a misfile. I flipped forward. There it was again. Not in the signature block. Not under representative. But embedded in the structure of the document. In the section titled Brand Assurance and Human Interface Continuity. My name sat there the way trademarks did. The way assets did. I skimmed faster. Slower. Then again. Carefully. The room dulled around the edges. Like sound underwater. The words made sense individually. They always did. That was the problem. representative embodiment, narrative stability, contractual presence. And then, Jeremy Hale shall remain attached to the brand entity as an operational constant. My fingers went cold. A laugh rose in my throat out of reflex. A neat little joke. A charming deflection. I didn't use it. Across the table, Victor's gaze lifted from his own copy and met mine. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look curious. He looked like someone confirming a wait. The city glittered behind him. The room breathed. My pulse thudded once, hard, in my ears. I lowered my eyes back to the page. My name wasn't under the contract. It was inside it. The family office didn't look like a place where people made choices. It looked like a place where outcomes were curated. Glass walls, warm wood, art chosen not for beauty, but for price history. Even the light felt edited, angled just enough to soften faces, just enough to make everyone look like a better version of themselves. My parents sat behind the desk the way monarchs did in documentaries, relaxed, composed, not wasting energy on posture because power already held it for them. "Jeremy," they said, pleasantly, "sit." I didn't. I leaned against the edge of the table instead, casual, easy, the way I always was, the way they'd taught me to be. "I assume this is the part where you tell me there's been a clerical mix-up," I said. And I laugh, and legal buys me a coffee. A faint smile. Polite. Fond. "You've always had timing," they said. "That's why you're invaluable." There it was. The word. Polished to a glow. Invaluable. "This deal," they continued, steepling their fingers, "requires continuity. Trust. A human interface the public already associates with stability. A face," I said lightly. "A presence," they corrected. "You understand business?" I did. That was the problem. My stomach tightened anyway. A slow inward curl, like something trying to remove itself from me. "So my name in the contract is symbolic." Funny way to spell structural. Their gaze sharpened a fraction. Not anger. Calculation. "Jeremy," they said gently now, "no one is taking anything from you. You're being anchored." Anchored. Metal taste bloomed on my tongue. I swallowed it back. They gestured toward the door. A dismissal. A mercy. "Legal will clarify the language." The legal wing always smelled like paper and ozone. Printers, servers, the faint burn of too many contracts being born every minute. Our family lawyer met me halfway down the corridor, tablet in hand, smile prepared. "Jeremy," he said, "I thought we might talk somewhere quieter." The meeting room was small, no windows, designed for conversations that weren't supposed to echo. He pulled up the clause before I sat. "Your concern," he began, "is primarily semantic." "Is it?" I said. "Because my concern is existential." He smiled sympathetically, the way doctors did when they were about to say nothing helpful. "This is a formality," he said, "a safeguard. You're not a party to the transaction. You're a stabilizing element within it." I crossed my arms. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around my ribs and was testing how far it could go. "So I'm not sold," I said. "I'm installed." "Jeremy," he chided softly, "you're a representative brand figure, a living assurance of continuity. This only formalizes what you already do. What I already do is fix reputations. And this," he said calmly, "protects one." Something slid in my gut, unpleasant and slick. "And if I walk?" The smile held, thinner now. "We don't anticipate that." There it was. Not refusal, erasure of the question. I stood before he could offer more language. Victor was waiting in the corridor outside, not leaning, not scrolling, just standing there like a closing argument, the space between us filled instantly, thick and private. My nerves lit like they were being tuned. "You planned that," I said, before I could stop myself. His eyes flicked briefly to the door behind me. "Planned what?" "My name." A pause. Then, "I didn't write the structure," he said. I recognized it. The way he said it, neutral, almost bored, burned worse than accusation. "So, What am I? I asked. A bonus clause? He took one step closer, not into me, into the air that belonged to me. You're not collateral, Victor said. You're infrastructure. The word hit harder than the contract had. I felt it in my throat, in the back of my skull. In the humiliating, instinctive way my body went still. Assets are replaceable, he continued. Systems are not. You're the system's voice. My jaw clenched. The metallic taste returned. Thick. So congratulations, he finished quietly. You're not owned. You're required. I let out a soft laugh. Professional. Controlled. The kind assets wore best. The PR department lived on a different floor from the executives, but it might as well have been a different species. Down here, the walls were writable. The lights were softer. The air smelled like coffee, citrus wipes, and overstimulated ambition. Screens floated with mood boards, brand trees, audience maps. People spoke in half-sentences and metaphors. Someone was always laughing too loudly in one of the creative rooms. This was where problems came to be reborn. Okay, crisis posture first, I said, rolling up my sleeves as I walked. If the public already hates you, you don't apologize. You reframe. If they're confused, you guide. If they're bored, you seduce. Mara, my assistant, fell into step beside me, tablet hugged to her chest. She was all nervous energy and bright eyes, the kind of person who believed words could still save things. Legal flagged 3 phrasing risks, she said, and finance wants us to stop using collapse in internal decks. Fine, I said. We'll call it structural fatigue. She snorted despite herself. We stepped into one of the creative rooms. Glass walls, neon marker scars, a collage of logos in various stages of decomposition. Show me the narrative spine, I said. A junior strategist pulled it up. From liability to legacy, boxes bloomed beneath it. Heritage, resilience, human continuity. The words slid into place like they always did. Comfortably, cleanly. This is the voice, I said automatically, not the product, not the numbers. The story people repeat when they don't remember facts. I moved through stations, adjusted copy, tweaked visual language, replaced control with care, replaced ownership with stewardship. Every substitution landed with professional satisfaction. And something else. A thin, persistent dissonance. On a video wall, a live call flickered into focus. Brand Lab, one of our more sensitive projects. The image stabilized on a pristine white space. Minimalist furniture. Soft light. A man sat at a table, well-dressed, groomed, hands folded neatly in front of him like he'd been arranged. Morning, Mr. Cole, a voice off-screen said warmly. We're just refining the ambassadorial angle. The man smiled on cue. Yes, he said. I'm here to help. His voice was steady, pleasant, empty. Something in my chest went strangely hollow. Mara leaned closer. He's been fantastic, she whispered. Doesn't complain. Doesn't push back. Legal loves him. What's his role again? I asked. Brand continuity interface, she recited. She hesitated, then softened it. He's attached to the subsidiary. Attached. I watched him nod as someone spoke to him about long-term narrative presence, about public-facing stability, about how lucky he was to be part of something enduring. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just existed. A phrase from the contract rose uninvited. Operational constant. I forced my attention back to the room. Okay, I said briskly. We pivot his framing. Less spokesperson, more symbol. The audience needs to feel like he belongs to the brand, not the other way around. Mara's smile wobbled, then recovered. Got it, she said. Belonging tests well. Of course it did. I moved on, to calls, to decks, to crisis maps, to spreadsheets that looked like psychology charts if you stared too long. Everywhere, the same familiar vocabulary bloomed. Anchoring, continuity, human interface, stability assets. Words I had used for years. Words that now felt colder, Sharper. I told myself it was stress, residual shock, the way any system resisted being examined from the inside. This was what I did. I fixed collapsing narratives. I gave failing things language that let them keep breathing. Crisis was my native tongue. I didn't traffic in harm. I trafficked in perception. That thought steadied me, smoothed the edges. Still, as I passed the brand lab again, the man on the screen lifted his eyes. For half a second, something flickered there. Not fear, not anger, recognition, and I walked faster, because suddenly, irrationally, the room felt like it was filling with something I couldn't name. And my own name kept echoing where no one had said it. The consortium building didn't bother pretending to be human. No warm wood, no softened edges, just glass, stone, and vertical lines so severe they felt disciplinary. The lobby smelled like sterilization and old money. The elevators rose without music, without mirrors, without mercy. I was led into the negotiation hall by a junior aide who didn't meet my eyes. The room was oval, table black as still water, screens embedded seamlessly into the walls. No logos, no distractions, the kind of place where deals weren't celebrated, only completed. Victor sat at the far side. No phone, no tablet, hands folded, back straight. His presence didn't dominate the space. It calibrated it. 3 other alphas were already seated, murmuring quietly over projections. Legal teams flanked them like well-dressed shadows. I took my assigned seat. The moment my spine touched the chair, the pressure settled in. Subtle, insistent. The biological reminder that I was not the highest variable in this equation. I hated that my body noticed before my mind did. "Mr. Hale," one of the alphas said pleasantly, "your restructuring proposal is elegant." "Thank you," I replied. "We specialize in sustainable narratives." The words slid out like polished glass. We began. Numbers, projections, risk matrices, long-term positioning. I spoke when addressed, clarified when prompted, framed volatility as opportunity, liability as architecture. Victor said almost nothing. He watched. It was uncanny. Even the others glanced at him before committing to phrasing, like instruments checking a tuning fork. "Your role," another alpha said, steepling his fingers, "is central to public stabilization. Visibility builds trust," I answered. "Trust builds tolerance." "Tolerance for what?" "For transition." Victor's gaze sharpened. "Transition," he repeated softly. "Yes," I said. "People don't resist change. They resist unmanaged change." A half-truth, a good one. He tilted his head a fraction. "Not in interest. In recalibration." The questioning continued. Technical, civil, precise. They probed the contract's human-facing architecture. The assurances. The continuity clauses. I answered all of it. Too well. At some point, one of the lawyers smiled and said, "You make it sound almost compassionate." "It is," I replied without thinking. "Stability reduces harm." Victor's fingers tapped once against the table. The sound cut through the room. "Does it?" he asked. The others paused. "Only a breath. Enough. Harm doesn't disappear when you rename it," he continued. "It migrates." A ripple of polite discomfort. I met his eyes. "We don't rename outcomes. We guide perception." "Perception of what?" "Of reality." "No," he said calmly. "Of acceptability." Something hot flared behind my ribs. "That's semantics." "No," he corrected. "That's ethics." The room shifted. An alpha across from me cleared his throat. "The consortium is not here to debate philosophy." Victor didn't look at him. He stood. The effect was immediate, instinctive. Chairs stilled. Conversations died. He walked around the table slowly, unhurried, a predator without display. When he stopped, he was behind me, close enough that I felt the change in the air. Not the flood some alphas used, not dominance, density. "You speak like someone who owns the architecture," he said quietly. I forced my shoulders to remain loose. "I design it." "No," he said. You maintain it. I turned slightly, not enough to face him, enough to acknowledge. And you don't smell like someone who owns this. The words landed wrong. Not insulting. Dislocating. You smell, Victor continued, like someone trying very hard not to notice what they're standing on. A few people shifted. Someone coughed. I felt heat climb my neck. Anger, clean and sharp. Be careful, I said. You're confusing involvement with responsibility. He leaned in just enough that only I could hear. No, he said. I'm separating them. Then he straightened and returned to his seat. The negotiation resumed. I kept speaking. I kept framing. I kept smiling. But something had misaligned. A small, precise fracture in the idea of who I was supposed to be. And for the first time since I'd entered that world, I couldn't quite fit back into my own role. They called it a rehabilitation office hotel. Which was impressive, considering there was nothing here that suggested either. The building rose near the river, all curved glass and pale stone, like a luxury spa that had learned corporate language. The lobby smelled faintly of eucalyptus and something sweeter. Engineered calm. Soft music. Soft light. Soft everything. The kind of place designed to make people forget why they'd arrived. I signed in under a name everyone here knew. A young receptionist smiled with professional warmth. He's ready for you, Mr. Hale. Of course he was. They led me through wide, quiet corridors into a private lounge. Floor-to-ceiling windows, neutral art, a coffee table that cost more than my first apartment, and a man standing by the window, Elliot Cole. I recognized him instantly, not because of his face. Faces changed, lighting changed, haircuts changed. I recognized him because I had built him. 2 years ago, his story had crossed my desk as a problem. Debt, cascade, litigation, a public meltdown that had gone viral in under 12 hours. He'd been a financial analyst with a reputation for volatility and a talent for saying the wrong thing on record. We turned him into a survivor brand. We reframed his breakdown as a breakthrough. We gave him a narrative arc, a philanthropic angle, a long-term continuity presence with one of the family's subsidiaries. I had written his rebirth deck myself. Mr. Hale, he said, turning with a careful smile. It's good to see you. His voice was pleasant, calm, trained. He wore a light sweater and slacks, expensive in a way meant not to be noticed. Everything about him spoke the same language as the room, curated neutrality. Elliot, I said. You look well. I am, he replied smoothly. They take very good care of me here. We sat. Someone brought tea without asking. How are the campaigns going? He asked. They're stable, I said. Your association continues to test positively. That's good. He nodded once. I like being useful. The words slid under my skin like cold water. We spoke the way people did when conversation had been designed in advance. About schedules, about appearances, about how the public was responding. He never complained. He never asked questions. He never mentioned anything that wasn't in the approved narrative set. At one point I asked, Do you ever miss before? He blinked. Once. Before what? Before the partnership. A pause. Fractional. Almost invisible. I don't really think in those terms anymore, he said gently. This is my role. It's simpler. Simpler. My chest tightened. They tell me consistency is important, he continued. Stability. The brand needs a steady presence. Yes, I said automatically. It does. His gaze studied my face. Not analytically. Curiously. You're very good at this, he said. Making things feel manageable. Something in my stomach twisted. I try. Another pause. Then unexpectedly his voice softened. At least, you still have a voice. The words landed quietly. They did not need force. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I felt heat gather behind my eyes. A pressure at the base of my throat. My pulse stuttered, then accelerated. I started, then stopped. I should let you rest. Of course, he said immediately, standing. Thank you for coming. He smiled again. It was flawless. I made it 3 steps into the hallway before my lungs forgot what they were for. Air refused to go where it was supposed to. My vision narrowed. A wave of heat rolled through me, followed by a sharp, humiliating cold. I braced a hand against the wall. Metal flooded my mouth. My fingers tingled. The floor tilted. Breathe. In. Out. The instructions arrived too late to be useful. I barely remembered the ride home, only the way my hands shook when I couldn't see them. That night, I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smile. He hadn't looked trapped. He'd looked finished. I lay staring at the ceiling, my heart thudding like it was trying to escape a room it didn't belong in. I had called what I did rescue. I had called it reframing. I had called it narrative care. But sitting in the dark, with the ghost of his words still echoing through my chest, a different vocabulary began to assemble itself. And for the first time, I didn't correct it. I let the disgust stay. I let the guilt burn, and somewhere under it, thin and unfamiliar, something harder started to form. Not fear, not yet. Anger. The archive was 2 floors below the legal wing, and one moral universe beneath it. No glass, no branding, no comforting light temperatures, just rows of compact shelving, biometric locks, and the faint, dry scent of paper that had outlived the people who'd signed it. I shouldn't have been there, which was exactly why I was. I used my own clearance. Not hacking, not rebellion. Familiarity. The first files were what I expected. Dormant subsidiaries, acquisition trails, shell reorganizations, debt transfers. The kind of financial archaeology that always looked innocent when you only examined one layer. I didn't. I pulled every document that intersected PR, campaign structures, narrative packages, public positioning frameworks. I cross-referenced them with contract annexes. The patterns emerged slowly, like a second image in a stereogram. Brand units aligned with legal containers. Ambassadorial roles mirrored liability transfer points. Continuity figures appeared precisely where human accountability evaporated. PR wasn't painting over the structure. It was the structure. I sank into a chair, heart thudding, as my screen filled with interlocking charts. The stories I built weren't decorations. They were corridors. Channels through which obligations were laundered into identity. Where debt became belonging. Where control became care. By the time I reached the server room, my hands were steady. The data nodes hummed like a mechanical heartbeat. Cold air. Blue light. Infinite quiet. I fed queries into the system using project names I had coined myself. The returns populated with chilling efficiency. Brand narrative. Contract writer. Public role. Legal anchor. Visibility. Liability displacement. And always, at the intersection, a name. Not always the same, but always a person. I didn't hear Victor enter. I sensed him the way you sensed a shift in pressure before weather broke. "You're far from your department," he said. I didn't turn. "Your security will notice," I replied. "They already have," he said calmly. "They think I'm the reason." I faced him then. He wasn't in a suit, just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled, no visible insignia. Less envoy, more man. In his hand was a thin drive. "You shouldn't have this," I said. He placed it on the metal table between us. "Neither should you," he answered. The air between us felt charged, but not with status this time. With decision. "What is it?" I asked. "Closed annexes," he said. "Structures routed outside the family's visible holdings. They don't show in standard audits." I slid the drive into a port. The first file opened, then the second, then the third. The architecture snapped into brutal clarity. It wasn't a series of corrupt deals. It was a system. A design that used branding as interface and people as stabilizers. Every face of the company wasn't a representative. They were the locking pins, the moral insulation. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "This scheme," Victor said quietly, "has a face." I stared at the screen, then closed my eyes. "Mine." The word tasted like iron. He didn't deny it. That's why you're dangerous, he said. And why they trust you. My reflection flickered in the server glass. Pale, focused, terrified. They don't trade people, I said. They trade narratives that trap people. Same outcome, Victor replied. I nodded once. The fear was still there, deep, animal. But it had been named, and naming it changed the shape. This doesn't end with exposure, I said. They've layered this for decades. Legal, finance, media. If I move wrong, you'll burn first, Victor finished. Yes. Silence. The servers breathed around us. Why bring this to me? I asked. Because I can terminate contracts, he said. And you can dismantle belief. Our eyes held. An alliance not sealed by trust, by necessity. I closed the files. When I spoke again, my voice was steady. Then we don't leak. No, Victor agreed. We reconstruct. The word rang in the cold. I knew in that moment that whatever I did next would not fit back into the life I'd built. The contract no longer smelled like ink. It smelled like people. And there was no way to make that scent disappear. The main family office occupied the oldest tower the company owned. It was never advertised, never photographed. It didn't appear on promotional materials or recruitment pages. It existed like a spine, structural, unseen, indispensable. The elevator rose without sound. I watched the numbers climb and felt something in me doing the same. Pressure, temperature, a slow internal ascent toward a place where nothing was softened. The doors opened to silence. The office was vast without being grand. No glass walls, no design statements. Dark wood, deep stone, low light. The air smelled faintly of books and something mineral, like old paper and groundwater. Power without aesthetic. My parents stood near the window, back to the room, hands clasped behind them. They didn't turn when I entered. I assume, they said calmly, that if you're here, you've already frightened yourself with incomplete data. I closed the door. I've frightened myself with complete patterns, I replied. They turned then. There was no warmth in their face, no cruelty either. Just order. Patterns are perspective, they said. You always were good at shaping them. I stepped forward. Why? I asked. Why structure it this way? Why people? They studied me for a long moment. Then they gestured to the chairs. I didn't sit. A flicker of annoyance crossed their eyes. Because people stabilize systems, they said at last. They absorb volatility. They carry narrative weight. You know this? Yes, I said. As a metaphor, as an instrument, they corrected. The word struck something in my chest. We don't trade people, they continued. Tone measured. We manage obligations. Debts don't disappear. Responsibility doesn't dissolve. It migrates to faces, I said. To interfaces, they said. To structures the public understands. You turn them into brands. We give chaos a logo. The phrase landed with chilling elegance. I shook my head once. Slow. You don't brand people, I said. You bury them. Their gaze hardened. No, they said. We preserve them. We protect them from collapse. By erasing them. By anchoring them. By trapping them. They exhaled quietly. Jeremy, they said. You're emotional. That's understandable. But you are mistaking mechanism for malice. Then explain Elliot. They didn't blink. Elliot is stable, they said. Secure. Useful. He contributes to something larger than himself. That is not harm. He's hollow, I said. He doesn't even remember what he lost. Most people don't, they replied. They remember discomfort. We remove that. Something hot surged up my spine. You remove choice. We remove chaos. I laughed. It came out wrong. Do you hear yourself? I asked. You're talking about human beings like they're load-bearing beams. Because function matters, they said simply. You of all people should understand that. I did. That was the blade. You didn't invent this, they continued. You refined it. You gave it language, legibility, public grace. My hands clenched. You're good at what you do, they said. So good that people accept structures they would otherwise revolt against. The room felt smaller. You, they finished, are proof that it works. The sentence struck deeper than any accusation. Not victim, not exception. Evidence. Something in me broke cleanly. The pain was immediate. Sharp. Total. A sudden, terrible clarity. I had not been outside the system. I had been its most elegant surface. I thought, I said hoarsely, that I was fixing things. You were, they said. From our perspective. And from mine? They tilted their head. You built a career on understanding perspective. The rage came after. Hot, physical, rising in my throat and limbs like something that wanted form. I will not be this, I said. They watched me, unmoved. You already are. The words didn't scare me. They freed something. I stepped back. This ends, I said. A pause. Then, be careful, they said quietly. You are very deeply embedded. I opened the door. For a moment, just before I left, something like regret touched their eyes. It didn't save the illusion. Nothing did. I walked out of the office knowing two things with absolute certainty. They would never stop. And neither could I. The corridor outside the family office was too narrow. It hadn't changed. Same stone. Same muted light. Same immaculate quiet. But my body moved through it like it no longer understood the dimensions. My pulse was everywhere at once. Throat, wrists, behind my eyes. Heat surged under my skin in unpredictable waves, followed by cold so sharp it made my teeth ache. I kept walking. Because stopping felt like falling. By the time I reached the elevators, the smell hit me. Not one thing. Everything. Sterile cleaning agents layered with metal and dust and old paper and distant citrus. Beneath it all, the heavier notes, alphas somewhere on this floor, their presence bleeding faintly into the air like a low electrical current. My lungs stuttered. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that sounded obscene. I stepped in. The doors slid shut, and the world tilted. The confined space concentrated everything. The sense, the pressure, the sudden, irrational certainty that the walls were closer than they had been a second ago. I braced one hand against the mirror. Get it together, I muttered. The reflection did not look convinced. My chest tightened, hard enough to hurt. Air scraped in shallow, useless pulls. My vision pixelated at the edges. I wasn't in the tower anymore. I was in that white room. I was Elliot's smile. I was my name printed where a thing's name belonged. I was my parents' voice saying you are proof. Something tore loose. A sound left my throat that I didn't recognize. Not a word, not quite a breath. The elevator jolted to a stop. The doors opened on the underground parking level. Cold rushed in. I stumbled forward. The space was vast and echoing. Concrete and shadow, rows of polished cars reflecting fractured versions of me. My shoes slapped too loudly against the floor. My heart did the same. I didn't feel like a person. I felt like pressure, looking for a seam. My hands were shaking. My jaw locked so hard it ached. The air tasted wrong. Bitter, overloaded. Jeremy. I flinched at my own name. Victor stood several meters away, near a support column. No entourage. No suit. Just him. Dark against the pale concrete. How long were you standing there? I demanded, too sharply. Long enough, he said. I laughed once. It broke halfway through. Great, I said. Then you got the full brand experience. I turned, intending to keep walking, but my knees chose that moment to fail their contract with gravity. I didn't hit the ground. Hands caught my arms. Solid. Warm through fabric. Easy, Victor said. Not command. Concern. The word sent a fresh wave of humiliation through me. Don't, I snapped, trying to pull back. My grip was weak. Unconvincing. You don't get to breathe, he interrupted. Just breathe. I am. You're not. He didn't pull me closer. Didn't impose. He simply stayed where he was, anchoring my uncooperative balance with both hands. as if he were holding something fragile and didn't trust the floor to do it. The scents in the air were still too much, but his was suddenly distinguishable, clean, restrained, human, not status, not hierarchy. A person standing too close to someone unraveling. "Look at me," he said quietly. I didn't want to. I did. His expression had lost its negotiation sharpness. No calibration, no measurement. Just focus. "You're not in that room anymore," he said. "You're here." My breath hitched. "And you're not alone." The words landed harder than anything my parent had said. Something in my chest caved. The shaking intensified. My eyes burned. The pressure behind them finally found release. "I didn't know," I said. The confession tearing out before I could shape it. "I didn't see it. I thought." "I know," he said. "How can you possibly know?" I demanded hoarsely. "Because if you were what they built," Victor replied, "you wouldn't be breaking like this." The answer didn't comfort me. It undid me. My head dipped forward without permission. Not onto him. Just down. Victor adjusted his grip, one hand sliding to my shoulder, firm and steady. Not alpha, not creditor, just someone holding the edge while something inside me came apart. We stood like that in the echoing quiet of the parking structure, my breath slowly, painfully relearning its job. When the shaking eased, embarrassment rushed in to take its place. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "No," he replied. "You're functional." A pause. "So am I," he added. "Most days." I let out a weak, surprised sound that might have been a laugh. He released me, but didn't step away. The space between us felt different now. Not adversarial. Shared. "We're not on opposite sides of this," Victor said. I wiped a hand over my face. "No," I agreed quietly. "We're inside it." And for the first time since I'd read my name in that contract, the catastrophe felt less like a structure above me, and more like something we were standing in together. My apartment had always been a neutral space. Clean lines, muted colors. Nothing that argued too loudly for my attention. It was designed the way my presentations were. Functional, aesthetic, non-committal. That night, it felt like a bunker. Victor stood near the window, jacket draped over a chair, the city's neon bleeding faint color across the walls. I paced the length of the living room with my laptop under one arm and a knot under my ribs. "We can't leak," I said, for the third time. "If documents surface without context, they'll control the narrative." "They always do. They'll call it misinterpretation," Victor agreed. "Or isolated misconduct. Or a hostile restructuring attempt," I added. "They'll drown it in legal language until no one remembers what it was supposed to mean." I stopped, opened my laptop on the table, and projected the first framework onto the wall. A familiar slide, the kind I'd used to save companies. Story arc, public transition. "I don't destroy brands," I said slowly. "I dismantle the belief systems around them." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me." The wall filled with diagrams. Audience, flow maps. Narrative escalation points. Emotional inflection zones. "This," I said, pointing, "is where you normally apologize. This is where you introduce leadership reform. This is where you reassure." I swiped my hand. "And this," I continued, "is where you turn the language against itself." He stepped closer. I pulled up the contract architecture we'd uncovered and overlaid it with public-facing campaigns. "The branding isn't camouflage," I said. "It's connective tissue. If I trace the narratives backward instead of forward, if I let the brand tell its own origin story, it becomes evidence." "People don't revolt against numbers," Victor said quietly. "They revolt against stories." "Yes," I said, "and I know exactly which ones make them listen." The words tasted like blood and clarity. We moved into the spare room I used as a work studio. Whiteboards, tablets, piles of old pitch decks, the detritus of past resurrections. I started pulling them apart. Every slogan, every visual motif, every legacy campaign linked to a point where obligations transferred and accountability vanished. "They think they're insulated by layers," I said, writing fast. "Legal, finance, PR. But PR is where perception becomes permission. "And you're the face," Victor said. I didn't answer, because he was right, and because the weight of that sentence had finally reached bone. We took the analysis to a closed private room in a cafe 2 blocks away, one of those places that stayed open for insomniacs and deals that didn't want daylight yet. The walls were brick, the tables scarred. The smell of burned coffee hung permanently in the air. We spread the material between half-empty mugs and a plate of food neither of us touched. "If you go public like this," Victor said, tapping the structure, "they won't just discredit the data. They'll discredit me," I finished. "They'll call you compromised, unstable, bitter, a publicity addict." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "They'll go for my credibility," I said. "My motivations, my mental state, and your safety," he added. I met his eyes. There was no dramatics in them, just assessment, just reality. "If I speak," I said quietly, "the brand dies. And you," Victor said, "will become the easiest variable to erase." Fear pulsed in my chest, bright and alive. It didn't leave, but something else settled around it. Weight, shape. "So we build it so it can't be walked back," I said. "We make the narrative do the exposing." "Not me. You'll still be the first face on it," he said. "Yes." Silence, stretched. Then Victor nodded once. "Then we do it right." I searched his expression for hesitation. There was none. "You don't have to stay in this," I said. "Once the structure is public, your consortium can withdraw. You can let it burn from the outside." "I could," he agreed. But this isn't just a bad deal," he said. "It's a design." He paused. "And I don't want it finding another face." The admission landed heavier than any promise. I swallowed. "Okay," I said. The word didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a door locking behind me. We went back to work. By the time the sky outside the cafe began to pale, the plan had a spine. And for the first time since my name had become a clause, the fear no longer asked me to run. It asked me to choose, and I had. The stage was lit, the way all reputable lies were, soft enough to flatter, bright enough to command attention, warm enough to suggest safety. Behind me, a massive screen pulsed with the opening slide, the subsidiary's new logo dissolving into a hopeful abstract shape. The tagline bloomed beneath it. Continuity, stability, future. The forum hall was full. Press, investors, public relations delegates, policy observers, people who wore their neutrality like armor. Cameras floated on quiet rails. Red lights blinked with patient hunger. I stood in the designated spot. The face, the brand's voice. Somewhere beyond the stage lighting, I knew Victor was watching. Not from a place of power, from a place of consequence. I drew a breath. The smell of the room hit first. Electrical heat, perfume, fabric. The faint animal echo of influence layered beneath it all. My pulse beat too loud in my ears. This was where I usually thrived. "Good evening," I said. The microphone carried my voice perfectly. "Thank you for being here to witness what we believe is not simply a restructuring, but a transition." I let the practiced cadence take over. A few heads nodded. Pens moved. Screens refreshed. "This company has faced challenges," I continued. "Like all legacy structures, it has weathered moments of instability. But instability is not collapse. It is invitation." A familiar slide appeared behind me. "From liability to legacy. We are not erasing the past," I said. "We are contextualizing it." The words flowed easily. They always had. I spoke of resilience, of responsibility, of long-term vision, of how brands, like people, evolved through pressure. I could feel the room relaxing into the narrative. That was the danger. Every successful transformation, I went on, requires continuity. Another slide. Smiling faces, ambassadors. Human stories, faces that anchor the abstract. Voices that translate complexity into something we can accept. I let the word linger. Then I changed the slide. The logo vanished. In its place, a structural diagram, not a branding map, a legal one. Somewhere in the audience, A murmur rippled. Continuity, I repeated, is not just a marketing principle. It's a contractual architecture. I saw confusion, alertness, a few journalists lifting their heads. Behind every reassuring narrative, I said, there is a structure that decides who carries what risk. The next image appeared, a brand campaign. Then, overlaid in red, a matching contract rider. This, I continued, my voice steady despite the way my hands had gone cold, is where a public role becomes a legal instrument. The murmurs grew. I've spent my career building stories that stabilize organizations, I said. Stories that soften change. Stories that help people feel safe inside systems they don't fully see. I paused, and I am very good at it. The admission hung, sharp and exposed. But what happens, I asked, when the story isn't just explaining the structure? When it is the structure? The screen filled with layered data, campaigns, contracts, human names. My name, I said, quietly now, appears here. A beat. I am not a signatory to this deal. Another, I am part of it. The room stilled. Cameras whirred, reorienting. This organization does not trade people, I continued. It trades obligations. It routes them through public identity, through narrative, through roles that look like opportunity. I gestured to the screen. This is how a debt becomes a face. This is how accountability migrates into embodiment. This is how a human being becomes continuity. I felt the fear crest. I let it pass. They call it representation, I said. They call it anchoring. They call it stewardship. The slides shifted again. Profiles, campaign slogans, legal annexes. But the outcome, I said, is always the same. I met the audience's gaze. Someone becomes the brand, so the brand can stop being responsible. Silence thickened, and in that silence, something in me finally let go. You can't own a voice, I said. The words didn't shake. They rang. Only silence it. The room erupted. Not applause, sound, questions, protests, the rapid staccato of media awakening. I stepped back from the podium as if from a line I could not uncross. The lights felt harsher now, the air colder. My reflection stared back at me from the black glass of a camera lens. Not the face I had built, not the interface, just a person whose voice no longer belonged to the structures that had taught it how to speak. As security and staff surged toward the stage, I felt something inside me tear cleanly. Not pain, shedding. The old narrative, competent, elegant, useful, sloughed away like a skin I hadn't realized was dead. I didn't know what would replace it. I only knew it couldn't follow me off that stage. And for the first time in my life, that didn't terrify me. It freed me. The world did not explode. It fractured. Screens filled first. News banners crawled across cafes and terminals, across the lobby monitors of buildings that pretended not to care about scandal. Headlines multiplied, contradicting and sharpening each other in real time. PR strategist alleges human asset structures in family empire. Consortium opens formal review. Multiple subsidiaries halt operations. I watched from the edge of a legal office lobby as my own face repeated itself in pixel after pixel, always mid-sentence, always frozen between certainty and fallout. I felt nothing, not shock, not triumph, just absence. The investigations began the way storms did, quietly, with pressure shifts only the sensitive noticed. Emails arrived. Meetings were canceled. Deals that had been announced with ceremonial optimism dissolved into carefully worded postponements. In conference rooms that smelled of disinfectant and tired ambition, lawyers spoke in low, precise voices. They asked me to recount what I had already made public. They nodded. They typed. They did not offer commentary. The family's representatives did not appear. Their silence was strategic. Victor's consortium moved first. Not loudly, cleanly. We sat in an empty negotiation room 2 days after the forum. The table was bare. The screens dark. Victor slid a document across the surface toward me. Termination of engagement, he said, and withdrawal from all structures associated with the Hale subsidiaries. I looked at the heading, then at the footer. My name was there, in the signature field, where it belonged. This, Victor added, formally dissolves any continuity claims over your person. I let out a breath that felt like it had been waiting years for permission. You're sure? I asked. They will contest, he said. They will delay. They will discredit. But this contract, he tapped the paper lightly, was the hinge. Without it, the architecture collapses into visibility. And me, I said. You, he replied, are no longer a structural constant. The phrase struck something loose inside my ribs. I signed. The pen didn't tremble. There was no ceremony. No applause. No sudden clarity. Just ink. And then, nothing. The days that followed blurred into a procession of empty rooms. Offices where meetings had once been relentless were suddenly hushed. Glass walls reflected spaces that had lost their purpose. Negotiation tables sat unoccupied, like stages after the audience had gone home. I moved through them like a ghost of my own career. Opportunities vanished. So did protections. People who had once spoken my name like a credential now avoided it entirely. And in the space that left behind, something unfamiliar grew. Quiet. I stood one evening in a small windowless conference room, watching dust settle in a beam of fluorescent light. No phones rang. No screens refreshed. No one needed my voice. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it was gentle. The contract had not burned in spectacle. It had burned like paper left too long in a closed drawer. Silently, thoroughly, leaving space where something else could exist. I leaned back against the cool glass and closed my eyes. For the first time since I'd learned to translate chaos into branding language, I wasn't holding anything together. And nothing, finally, was holding me. We met in a cafe that didn't know who either of us were. No screens looping headlines. No private rooms. No corporate glass. Just scratched wooden tables, uneven chairs, the smell of cinnamon and burned espresso, and a chalkboard menu written by someone whose handwriting had no legal department. Victor arrived first, not in a suit, not in the precise silhouette I had learned to associate with consequence. Just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up, hair slightly out of order, coffee already cooling in front of him. For a moment, the sight of him like that disoriented me more than anything that had happened in the past week. Is this, I asked, setting my cup down, what anonymous people do now? They drink things with foam, he said gravely, and pretend it matters. I snorted before I could stop myself. The sound surprised us both. We sat, and didn't immediately fill the space. The silence wasn't heavy. It was unused. I keep expecting, I said finally, for someone to call and tell me I forgot to perform. Victor's mouth curved faintly. I keep checking rooms for exits. Occupational damage, I said. Survival reflex? We sipped. Watched people move past the windows. Students. Couples. A man arguing with his phone. A woman laughing into hers. Ordinary motion. Uncurated. What do you do? Victor asked. When no one is structuring you. I considered the question. Right now, I said. I reorganize my kitchen cabinets at 3 a.m. and pretend it's a philosophy. A quiet huff of laughter. That tracks, he said. We left the cafe and walked with no destination, just side streets and crosswalks. The city stripped of significance and full of texture again. Neon reflected in rain-dark pavement. Someone played music from an open window. A delivery truck exhaled tiredly at a light. At one point, Victor said, "You don't walk like someone who's being followed anymore." I glanced at him. That obvious? To someone who's spent years measuring threat, he said. Yes. I didn't know what to do with the small, warm satisfaction that brought. My apartment still smelled like last night's coffee and legal paper. The city hummed faintly through the glass. We stood in the entryway like two people who hadn't been given a script. I can go, Victor said, not moving. You can stay, I replied, equally still. He did. We didn't touch. We didn't circle. We sat on opposite ends of the couch with mugs between us and talked about things that did not optimize. Where we'd grown up, what we'd been bad at, the strange things we missed from lives we pretended not to have. At some point, I admitted I didn't know who I was without a brand. Victor considered that. Good, he said. That means no one's decided yet. The words landed gently, not as reassurance, as invitation. When he finally stood to leave, it was unceremonious. No lingering tension, no manufactured moment, just the quiet understanding of a door not closing. At the threshold, he hesitated. This, he said, gesturing vaguely between us, doesn't have to be anything. I met his eyes. Maybe, I replied. That's what it gets to be first. His answering smile wasn't strategic. It was human. And when the door closed behind him, the apartment didn't feel like a space waiting for performance. It felt like a place something could grow, slowly, badly, warmly. The office was too small for anything important, which made it perfect. 2 rooms. A narrow window that looked directly into another building's brick wall. A second-hand desk with one drawer that stuck. Folding chairs we hadn't replaced yet because neither of us trusted the idea of permanence. There was no reception area, no logo, no illusion. Victor stood in the doorway, surveying the space like it might try to lie to him. This, he said, is either the beginning of something functional or a spectacular mistake. Those categories aren't mutually exclusive, I replied. He almost smiled. We spent the first week not opening. We cleaned, painted, argued about whether the light fixture was industrial or depressing, drank too much coffee, built a server rack out of parts he sourced from places I didn't ask about. There was no ceremony. Just construction. On the 3rd day, I wrote 3 words on the whiteboard. We don't fix brands. Victor watched from the doorway. I added the next line. We expose them. Silence settled. That, he said finally, is going to make us very unpopular. Good, I said. It means we're not for sale. We built the framework slowly, not a consultancy, not a PR firm, not a legal service, an agency that traced how narratives hid power, how reputations absorbed responsibility, how language turned systems into scenery. Principles went up beside the whiteboard. No representation contracts. No continuity clauses. No human branding. Full structural transparency. Clients are not faces. They are sources. We argued about wording, about scope, about whether we were naive to think we could interrupt designs this entrenched. We're not dismantling empires, Victor said one night, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his laptop balanced on a box. We're making them visible. Visibility changes outcomes, I replied. Sometimes. Enough, I said. The name came last. We wrote dozens, burned them all. The one that stayed wasn't elegant. It was accurate. Voice break. Victor raised an eyebrow. Subtle, he said. Earnest, I countered. He nodded once. Dangerous. We ordered a temporary door plaque from a print shop that still used actual ink. When it arrived, slightly crooked and smelling faintly of glue, we both stared at it longer than necessary. It was real. 2 days later, the first request arrived. Not from a corporation, from a person. A short email. No branding, no signature block. Just a description of a nonprofit being restructured after taking on a silent donor. Staff dismissed. Founders sidelined. A new ambassador suddenly attached to its public face. I don't know what's happening, the sender wrote, but the language feels wrong. I read it twice, then a 3rd time, slower. Victor leaned over my shoulder. Do we? He began. Yes, I said immediately. We sat in the too small office, the late afternoon light cutting a thin, defiant line across the floor. For the first time since the forum, my chest didn't tighten at the thought of work. It opened, not with ambition, with direction. We weren't rebuilding what had broken. We were standing where it had fractured, and waiting to listen. The office didn't look like a headquarters. It looked like somewhere work happened. There were cables along the baseboards now. Actual plants that Victor had insisted were structural morale support. A second desk wedged into the far corner. A bulletin board slowly surrendering to pinned notes, hand-sketched diagrams, and the occasional coffee-stained reminder that humans still existed in the process. Evening light slid between the buildings and painted the brick outside our narrow window in copper and violet. The city hummed, alive, indifferent, ongoing. I stood at the desk, staring down at a single-page document. No annexes, no continuity clauses, no human interface language, just a service agreement between two named individuals and an entity that didn't pretend to own anyone. Voice break. Purpose, investigative narrative analysis, scope, defined, duration, revocable. My name sat where names were supposed to sit, not embedded, not implied. Written. Victor leaned against the opposite desk, arms folded, watching me with an expression that wasn't measurement. It was attention. "You don't have to sign it tonight," he said. "I know. You don't have to sign it at all." "I know that too." I picked up the pen. For a moment my hand hovered, not from fear, from recognition. I thought of the first time I'd signed something in that family tower, how small the line had felt, how enormous the silence around it had been. This page didn't carry weight, it carried permission. I signed. The ink dried quickly. No cameras, no witnesses, just the quiet sound of a pen finishing a sentence. I set it down and let out a breath that felt like it came from a deeper place than lungs. "It's strange," I said, "how much ceremony I used to build into things that weren't choices. And how little you need," Victor replied, "when something is." We didn't shake hands. We didn't formalize. We moved to the window and stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the city fold itself into night. Office lights clicking on, traffic rethreading the streets, a rooftop somewhere across the way, blooming suddenly with laughter. "What happens," Victor asked, "when someone tries to make you into a structure again?" I considered it. "Then," I said, "I'll recognize the language before it recognizes me." He nodded. The answer satisfied something. We stayed there, not touching, not apart, sharing the simple fact of space without strategy. For years, my voice had been an instrument, a tool, a solvent. I had learned how to make it fit systems so seamlessly that no one noticed where it ended. Now, in the soft mechanical breathing of the city, it belonged to something smaller and infinitely harder to move. I gave brands a voice. Then I learned how to take mine back.